primary have a very difficult time articulating. They stumble on their words. They just have a hard time putting things into communication. And it kind of makes sense because kinesthetic is trying to make sense of the different emotions we've got, or feelings that we've got going on in our body, and translating that into language. And something always gets lost in the translation.
The stutterer? Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe. Could be. It might help to explain why a person's stuttering. They usually look at stuttering as an anxiety-related condition, but I think it could be trauma, or it could even be genetic. So these three processes are kind of intriguing. And why do I think that they're intriguing related to anxiety? Because many of the people that I work with use all three of these processes to beat themselves down. What are you laughing about? making sense. Huh? No, okay. I resemble that. Yeah, it helps us in becoming more aware of our thought process. Because, as I said before, we're thinking all the time, but we've been doing it for so long that most of it's completely unconscious. You don't even realize we're doing it. But one of the things that happens, that helps me when I journal, is I spend some time quiet first, trying to figure out, what am I thinking? Have I got pictures going through my head that I'm reacting to? Do I have conversations that are going on in my head? And if we keep ourselves frantic, we're not going to know. To do these things takes practice. To recognize the way we think takes practice, and it takes slowing down. So your word that you spoke about before, that's becoming more and more popular apparently in the legal community, mindfulness, that's been around for a long, long time. And mindfulness is the ability to be alone with our thoughts and there's two basic ways of living. One is living frantically, and the other is living mindfully. Mindful people are generally people who other people go to for help and suggestions, because they have learned serenity. They have learned wisdom. How do we become wise? By going through a lot of crap in life and learning from it. But if we don't ever learn from it, or if we just hurry through life and think, boy, I just made it through that, and we don't learn from it, then we don't get the depth. So living mindfully allows us to be more wise. Kind of remind. Did anybody ever find something to really erase with? Because this isn't doing a really good job. Maybe it's fine. This is not something that I intended to share, but one thing leads to another as I'm sitting up here. But in Steve Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody read it? Excellent, excellent book. It's not one of those books, though, that it's not a page turner. It's not one of those books that you just read cover to cover and you think, wow, that was cool. It's one of those that you read about 3 or 4 pages and then you have to put it down and think about it, and it's got exercise and all that kind of crap that I hate. Don't slow me down. But in it, he talks about this diagram. And think about what we think of in our circle of concern. We have two areas in our life. One is our circle of concern. And what is it that most of us concern ourselves with? What do we worry about? What typically do we worry about? Thank you. What do you worry about?
Health.
Health.
Money.
Getting your work done.
Expectations. Family or other people. Here in South Dakota, what else do we worry about? The weather. Okay, this is kind of enough. There's lots of other things we tend to worry about, but think about it. Most of the things that we worry about, we have no control over. And yet we spend most of our energy in our circle of concern. Covey talks about another area that we need to learn to spend more time in, and that is in our circle of influence. What do we have control over? Personally.
Getting your work done.
Well, sort of. Our behavior. And what's the other thing we have control over? No. That's the only two things we really have any control over. Now, just because we can have control over those two things does not mean we've ever been taught how to have control over those two things. Those are the only two things we can have control over. And a big part of what I teach in my program is that we spend most of our energy in this area, worrying about things we have no control over. And when we worry, our energy is going out. In fact, we're probably trying to convince people to listen to us. Right? Please listen to me. Who has the power in a relationship? I'd be really curious to know.
I said the woman.
I said the
Why does
wife.
that not surprise me?
I said the wife.
Yeah. The person who has the power in a relationship is the person who withdraws. The person who has the power in the relationship is the one who is quiet. So, no, women do not have the power. No, actually, this was very interesting because my wife and I went to a therapist one time. We were frustrated with some things in our marriage, and the door closed, and the typical scenario unfolded, meaning I just went apeshit. And she sat there listening. And I was very frustrated because my wife was a person who had areas that she simply wouldn't talk about, and she never, ever accepted responsibility for her behavior. She and I are now divorced. It was not my idea, but 25 years, and she decided she didn't want to be married anymore. Because her belief also was that if you argued, you didn't have a good marriage. So, apparently we didn't have a good marriage. But anyway, I went apeshit, and finally thought maybe I was going to be heard, and the therapist leaned over to my ex-wife and said, "My goodness, how much power you have." And my wife looked at her and said, "Me? Power? Look at that guy. He's coming apart at the seams." That's exactly why. Because I wanted some reaction. And the more I pounded, the more she got quiet. Ever have problems with your teenagers? You ever figured out why they have so much power? Ever thought about anybody that withdraws more than your teenager? And do they do it intentionally? No, we don't do these things intentionally. We do it because it works. So we withdraw. We get quiet. You can't make somebody talk any more than you can make them eat. That's what eating disorders are all about. It's power, usually. So, as we learn to have control over our behavior and our attitude, what happens is people come to us. I had a couple actually one time that came to me and they said, "We've heard you could help, and we want you to help us to get our teenager more involved in the family." And I said, "I can't help you. It's an untenable contract. But I can help you to work on your marriage so that he is more attracted to spending time with you." See the difference? Usually it's people that have learned to take control of their attitude. Obviously, when I was suffering with all my anxiety and depression, I had very little control over my own attitude. I had a lot of stinking thinking. A lot of really catastrophic thoughts. A lot of behavior a lot of worry, a lot of physical symptoms that left me feeling like a victim. None of which is about having a healthy attitude. So as we learn to take more control over our attitude and our behavior, and to find better balance in our life, because just getting our work done is not the ultimate goal. We have to have, well, part of what Covey talks about in his book also, is the importance for people as they recognize what's important to them to write a mission statement. You know, most of us have been parts of firms or organizations, churches, that have written a mission statement. But how many of us ever write our own personal mission statement? And when we write our own personal mission statement, it helps us to become aware of what is my definition of success. And if your definition of success is making a lot of money, then work all the time. Because you can. In America, you can be wealthy. If you decide to, you can be wealthy. But if that's not my definition of success, I'm hoping that when I die, hopefully not soon, but I hope to be missed. I hope that my kids miss me. I hope that former clients will say, you know, he was always so negative. I have been in a very successful practice, but I probably make much less than many of my clients. But we all have to come up with our definition of success. And none are wrong. But we have to learn to live. Oh, I'm trying to look back in my notes here. We have to learn to live our lives congruent with those values. Instead of saying, well, someday I'm going to change my behavior so that people will remember me or that people will miss me. But right now, I've got to make all the money I can possibly make. Well, our kids' experience of us throughout their lives is what's going to define whether they're going to miss us or not whether at a retirement age we become available. So we all need to kind of live congruently with our definition of success. There's actually what are we doing? Oh, we've got time. We can do a little exercise that Kobe talks about in his book. We have to do the deep relaxation too. Close your eyes for just a minute. And cross your arms and your legs and imagine yourself, use your imagination positively, to imagine yourself in a comfortable chair, a lounge chair. And then start at the top of your head and allow your different muscle groups to relax as you breathe in and breathe out. Until that reaches the bottom of your body. So you're really quite relaxed. And then picture in your mind's eye your own funeral. Picture the people that you hope will be represented at your funeral. Peers, family, friends. And let each of those groups be represented. And what you would hope that each of them would say about you in your passing. Just take a few minutes, just let each group of people say what their experience of you was and how they feel about your passing. Or what you would hope they would say about you. Take as much time as you like with that, but slowly begin to come back to the room. Because part of what that exercise does is helps us to determine our definition of success. I remember sitting with my son at my father's funeral just a couple of years ago. Just gotten back from the military as a Marine. He was there. My other son was in a semester in Spain, so couldn't be there. And as I sat there with my son, I put my arm around my son, and I said, you know, I had a good relationship with my father. My father took me hunting and fishing. My dad did a lot of, he was the coach of my baseball team. He was my Boy Scout leader. My dad was a good man. But my dad was raised by an alcoholic. And my dad, and I never liked being at my grandparents' house. They were cruel. And my father was never spoken with. And my father and I never spoke. We would have fun together, but we never spoke. I never knew my father. So, what I said to my son was, you know, I hope someday when I die, that you will know me. That's my responsibility. Not my habits. We all know our parents' habits, what they did. But do we know why they did it? Do they talk about that stuff? And if we don't learn to do that growing up, it's difficult. It's something we learn. But it's something I definitely learned as I sat across from my therapist and spoke with her about things that I'd never spoken about before. I learned to listen talked about the very last lecture in the program is about some of those 4 existential issues. The last one is meaning. What is it that defines our sense of meaning and success in life? And then first of all, how aware are we of our definition of success? And second of all, how well are we in articulating that to the people that are dear to us? I just, this is definitely something I wasn't planning to share, but I had probably the most amazing experience that I've ever had in 35 years last Wednesday, just before I get off. It's my last appointment. About 3 years ago, about 35 years ago, 30 years ago, I had a woman that came to see me, and 30 years later, when her daughter was having problems, the daughter is now my age, almost my age, and she came to meet with me. When I went into practice, I wanted to be a family practitioner. I wanted to see generations of families. So I'd seen mom first, and now I was seeing her daughter. And she had met me because her son had had some brain injuries in an injury at work at school, and he wanted to get back to playing with confidence. So she came to meet with me, and they went through my program. And in the process of going through the program, this is frequently what happens, teenagers that go through with a parent will say, my God, we have never talked like this. Because they're constantly getting provoked with all this new information, and on the way home, they end up talking about it. Okay. So her son and she got known to each other because of all this information. They went home and they told the other son and the dad, who's also, the mom is a recovering alcoholic, and so is the dad. They went home and said, you ought to go through that program. So the next time I taught the program, the other son and the father went through, and they said, my God, we've never talked like this before. Well, last Wednesday, all 4 of those group members, all 4 of those family members came in and they wanted to have a family session. I don't do family therapy, but I know them all, so I wasn't going to say no. But 2 weeks prior, they had all gone to Bluebell Lodge and had a family weekend together. And the 2 boys brought up to Dad, incredibly, Dad, I love you, but you're absent. I don't know you. You've not taught me a damn thing. I don't even know how to date a girl when they're 23 and 22. Because of the way you treat mom. And I heard this from the woman, Maureen, and I said, well, what? I asked him during this family session, I heard that you heard this from your boys. What kept you from just getting up and leaving? Well, he's a recovering alcoholic, and he said, that's true. But he said, you have to understand, I never talked to my dad. I didn't know how to teach them anything. My dad never taught me anything. So he was intrigued by what his sons confronted him about. And then they went on to have an hour session with me that absolutely, again, they were talking with their parents about how he was just leaving the house for the first time. They'd both gotten into trouble with drugs and alcohol. And probably not surprising, because both mom and dad had a history of drugs and alcohol. That's the way they dealt with their feelings, just get numb. So I guess what I'm trying to convey, and I'm not certain if I'm conveying it very well, is that as we learn to communicate with self and to articulate that to others, evolution in relationships begin. That's my definition of success. I guess thank you. I just realized that's why I shared that story with. That's what I went into practice to do. To help families, to help individuals, to communicate with themselves and with others. And once you learn to do that, you don't suffer with anxiety and depression. It's just what our body is telling us when it has all these physical symptoms. You know, the headaches and the stomach problems and the chest pain and the panic attacks and the worry and all this kind of stuff, smoking, the drinking. It's your body's just trying to get your attention. Would you listen to me? And if we can look at it this way, it's our body's desperate attempt to communicate with me. That's all it's doing. It's not an indication, because a lot of people have health anxiety. You know, we talked about that before.